I am an intentional interim, and I'm between jobs at the moment, so I'm doing quite a bit of traveling. I was in Emerald Grove last week, and I'll be in Pittsville next week, and I'm aware as I go different places, and everyone's style of worship is a little bit different, how much trust there must be for you all just to expect that someone that you don't know is going to show up on time and be all right. So thank you. We come this morning to the last Sunday in the season of Epiphany. We start and end the season with light. The bright light that leads the wise men to the Holy Family, the light from the heavens at Jesus' baptism, and that same dazzling light showing us Jesus transfigured. Nice bookends for a season that means to make known. I grew up in the church. My dad was a pastor, and I like these markers in the church year. The markers remind me of bigger picture things. They remind me that there is always movement in life, even if I'm not feeling it. They remind me that journeys can come at any time, that some of them are short and some of them are not so short, and whether I'm drug through them or have set them up to happen, God is always right there on the journey. I couldn't help but read this text this week, and for the first time, in light of our electronic culture. I'm not in any way saying that that culture is a bad thing. I use some of it and some of it I don't. But it struck me that in this digital age, the disciples would probably have had cell phones, and they would have had cameras on the cell phones. And there would have been pictures of Jesus in his radiant glory, and accompanying text messages or tweets, sharing, announcing, proclaiming to the world the vision that the disciples saw that day. Jesus might well still have ordered them not to talk about what they'd seen or not click the little picture of what they'd seen, but no matter how quickly he said it, it probably would have been too late. I guess he could have told them to turn off their cell phones or pages on the way up, like they do in the theater. But I still see those fingers flying on tiny keys, telling the world that there was a really cool experience going on. I'm not trying to be flip, maybe it sounds like it. But I would think that throughout time, there have been things that were so exciting, people just wanted to share them. We send out birth and graduation announcements. We invite tons of people to weddings and showers. We throw retirement parties or invite friends over to celebrate new jobs. They even show the exciting parts of school football games on the evening news. And back in the old days, when you came back from vacation, you invited your neighbors over for coffee so that you could show them the slides of your trip. It is human nature to want to share what we find exciting with others. There's no doubt that this was an exciting experience. Peter and James and John hadn't been there at the other big transforming light moments. They had had small glimpses of Jesus' identity and what that meant. But those glimpses were always in the middle of something else, some controversy or some need. So I would think these glimpses were shadowed by their circumstances. Stuff like, I saw Jesus do this incredible healing the other day, and now because he did that healing, we can't go into that town anymore. Or I heard Jesus say this amazing thing the other day, and people yelled at him for it, for not following God's way. Jesus' glory as it had been seen in little moments of wonder by the disciples and others was always, it seems to me, being clouded over by the negative, by people trying again and again and again to disprove that glory. So Jesus sets up this opportunity for a larger show of glory, a moment that is set apart for the rest of their lives. Setting things apart like this gives something more power, and it keeps it from being weighed down by the shadows of other stuff. So Jesus takes them on a journey that will change them in ways that will sustain them through the shadows to come. Mark tells this story in 7 verses. But if you think about it, it had to have taken a long while. Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led them up a high mountain. How long do you suppose it takes to climb a high mountain? And I would think that they talked on the way. Perhaps there were questions about where they were going and why they were going, about why the 3 of them had been singled out for this trip. Maybe questions about whether they were there yet. There may have been a little self-important talk about the 3 of them being alone with Jesus, or there might have been dragging of feet as Peter and James and John wondered if the trip meant somehow extra chores for them. Mark obviously doesn't give us any clues about the journey, except the clue of the high mountain part. Because even if it wasn't high by some standard or another, it was high enough that it took time to get there. High enough that it wasn't like dropping into church for Christmas Eve worship. And I think there was something to them not knowing what to expect when they got there. They had to work for it, in a way, by walking up the mountain. But whatever preparation they had for that moment of glory was their life preparation. The stories of faith that had been passed on to them from generation to generation, their daily glimpses of Jesus' glory in the midst of living and working together, and their ability to trust Jesus' leading and be open to that moment when it came. But unfortunately, moments are always just moments. They stand out for us if they're special. The occasions we announce or make parties for, or those unexpected moments that in retrospect changed our lives in some way. We can take pictures of them, hang them on our walls, both at home and online. But what we preserve that way isn't actually the moment, it's the touchstone that takes us back to the moment. This was such a moment for the disciples. Peter wasn't speechless for long. It's sort of hard to imagine Peter speechless at all, isn't it? And when Peter recovered, he wanted to savor the moment, to save it, just like I imagine we all would do. And before they had time to really savor the moment of glory, to bask in the light of it, to figure out what it meant, it was overshadowed by a cloud. And while that might have reminded them of the stories of their ancestors, of the cloud resting on the mountain as a sign of God's presence in the wilderness, it was still before they had time to factor that in, to place it with the presence of Moses and Elijah, a voice came from the cloud saying, "This is my son, the beloved. Listen to him." And instantly they were alone again, the 4 of them, with hearts racing and questions galore, and no words to express their feelings. I imagine the walk down the mountain was opposite in every way to the walk up. I imagine that they were quiet, each one caught up in himself, each trying to sort out what they all had seen and what that meant. And then, as they near the end of the journey down, the silence is broken by Jesus' words telling them not to share what they've seen. In some ways, I think if I'd have been them, I'd have been glad for the instruction, for permission not to talk about what seems unarticulate. On the other hand, how do you not speak of such glory? And yet, if they had, would people have believed them? Would people have thought that the life of discipleship was getting too hard for them and that they needed to take a break? So even if they didn't tell anyone, if they followed Jesus' instructions, even if they couldn't articulate what they'd seen and what they'd heard, what it was like to be there in Jesus' glory, unimpeded for that instant, the proof of their having been there, their proof of the things that they had seen would have been within them. The proof of their seeing would have been the way they were changed, the way they saw the world differently, the way they witnessed Jesus' ministry differently, the way that they were new people. So even if they didn't say anything, even if they didn't have pictures to put on their Facebook page, I think those disciples shared what they saw with the world. I think that as Jesus was changed before them, they were also changed. And that change was passed on to the people they did ministry with throughout their lives. We also have little moments of glory. Sometimes they are on mission trips. Sometimes they're in hospital rooms or walking in the park. We may or may not share them with others in a way that speaks clearly about what happened or how it changed us. But I think people see changes in us when they happen. I think they see us carrying that light of God differently within us, and they respond to it, and then they are also changed by it. I know a number of people who like the quote from St. Francis of Assisi, "Preach the gospel at all times, when necessary, use words." It's a nice statement. It speaks, I think, to our desire not to browbeat or be browbeaten with the gospel. And I think that we do speak the gospel, or don't speak it, as the case may be, most often without words. But I also think we have to learn to use words some of the time. We have to find that balance that has us backing up our actions with words so people know where the actions came from, so people know that we have seen Jesus or been changed by it. Why do we feed the hungry? Because it's the right thing to do. Why do we know it's the right thing to do? Because Jesus taught us to feed the hungry. I expect that even if they didn't tell people what they'd seen, the disciples did share greatly what they'd seen, in tangible ways and in words that spoke of their knowledge, if not directly their experience. And so I wonder, in what ways have you been transformed this season of Epiphany? In what ways has the light of God been made known to you? In what ways do you carry the light of God within you differently than you did before? In what ways will you share your transformation, your experience, your knowing of God with others through the next little journey that you're on? God calls us into community, and then God sends us out, calls us in to be refreshed and renewed and reminded, and then sends us out so that we might help others be refreshed and renewed and reminded of the light and love and glory of God. Amen.